Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We still have a few people trickling in, but we'll just kind of get started and introduce the event tonight. So my name is Jordan Revenaugh. I'll be your host. I'm an admissions counselor here at Calvin, and I work with families from the Pacific Northwest, California, Eastern Michigan, and then parts of Kent County as well. So obviously some of your parents out there tonight, I might be your personal admissions counselor. If so, it's nice to see you again. So we recognize that every parent coming into college, sending students off to college is going to have some questions, but you guys in particular might have some more specific questions since your student won't necessarily be right next door during the college experience. So tonight we have some parent panelists who are here to help answer some of those questions using some of their very own personal experience as well. So I'm going to kind of pass it off to them to maybe introduce themselves. You can say like what grade your student's in and where you guys are rooted as well.
Okay, let me kick started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kalyan Subramaniam. I'm based here in Lake Forest in Orange County. My son Rehan is a senior doing his pre-med in Calvin, and he's just feeling sad that he's just got another 8 weeks to graduate. And every time we tell him that, it's just 8 weeks away, he says, "Dad, please don't remind me. I want to stay here longer." So that's a little bit about me and my son.
My name is Melissa Bolt, and we live in San Diego, California. And our daughter is also a senior, and she is in the nursing program and finishing up her last round of clinicals. Excited about that. And we are actually losing her to Michigan. She loved it so much. She is getting married and staying. So she definitely really, really enjoyed it out there.
I'm Jen McDonough, and we have Jack, who's a junior, and his major is English, history, and a minor in linguistics. And he's also falling in love with Michigan and maybe also with a girl. So we'll see about him coming home. I think he might be a fifth year on purpose, actually. And then our daughter, Kate, is a freshman, and she is an education major. Did I say already we're from Redmond, Washington? And then we have two others, and my youngest is determined to go to Calvin as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing. So these are the parents that are going to be answering some of your questions tonight. And you guys are welcome to use the Q&A feature on Zoom. We have the chat feature and the Q&A feature, but we would prefer if you guys use the Q&A feature because then any questions that we don't have time to answer tonight, we can follow up with you on. So we'll try our best to get through all the questions that we have. But if for some reason we are unable to get through the questions, we'll follow up with you afterwards. And then maybe any questions that you think of afterwards, you're welcome to either email to admissions@calvin.edu, or if you know your admissions counselor personally, you can also email them directly as well. So we have a couple questions already to kind of get started with. So I'll go ahead and read those off. And then parents, you guys are welcome. Whoever wants to answer it or feels like they have a good answer, feel free to hop in and go ahead and answer that. And then if anybody else has anything to add, you're welcome to go ahead and add on to that afterwards. So to start off the night, our first question is, how did you feel about your student moving so far away from home?
Well, initially for us as parents, it was a little bit of a concern because when our son, graduated from school, he got admitted in 9 out of the 10 colleges that he applied to. And he got a majority of his admissions in state as well, close to home. But once we made a visit to Calvin and he made a visit to Calvin, and he was absolutely sure that that's going to be his home for the next 4 years. So initially what was kind of a little bit anxious, but then the more time we spent in Calvin, couple of visits, we were convinced that that would be the place, and that anxiety kind of became as comforting as it could be, like he was just next door, staying at home.
I think this day and age of sending our kiddos far away, it's helpful, the technology that we have. I mean, look what we're doing this evening. That certainly wasn't my reality when I attended university. So the fact that we can FaceTime really quickly, we don't have to plan for a phone call, is really helpful. I also thought the communication from Calvin has been helpful. Everything from celebratory to, hey, a heads up, something happened on campus, to this is what the kids have to look forward to, just feels like it's a partnership and that you're not in the dark, even if your child maybe won't bring you along for the ride on everything, Calvin will. So I love the FaceTime. I love being able to connect with my kids, even just via text, just sending them a heart. Of course, it was a lot easier to send Kate because older brother Jack was there or is there. So I think that was helpful. But um, I think once we got there as well, when we did the visit, it's a pretty user-friendly town. So a lot at their fingertips. And as far as medical, grocery, a run to the store, just super helpful to have all of that. And for us, the clincher was when Jack attended chapel and it was so highly attended. He thought, this is optional and this many students are a part of chapel. This is the place I want to be, which was a comfort coming from, your child is leaving you. Are they going to continue church? Are they going to continue in their faith? How's that going to play out? And that was a comfort as well.
Okay, so moving on to our second question of the night. In what ways have you seen growth in your student because they're farther away from home?
So this is interesting. We have our son is a junior this year and is looking at Calvin as well. And we were discussing, going away or staying closer to home. And one of the things that we talked about was how our oldest had to become more independent. And as things would happen, if she needed to go get a vaccine, or if she was sick and needed to go, or she needed contacts, she had to make those phone calls and she had to figure out where to connect. We are fortunate. We have family who's in the area. So it was a little different for us knowing that we had aunt and uncles who were right there. But it really made her step up and do some of those things that would have been very easy for us to do had she been closer to home. So we saw those pieces of independence happen faster in her freshman and sophomore year, which then when she was ready to move off campus, seeing her step up in her friend group to call different landlords to check in on, gas, electric, all those different things was really neat to see. So.
What we noticed with Rehan was his ability to make decisions and prioritize his day, and his schedule really made a lot of difference as he progressed every semester in Calvin. So that's the biggest difference that we saw in him. And that was a question that I asked him as well. So how have you seen yourself grow in Calvin? And he says he kind of went into adulting much quicker than normal in terms of decision making.
I agree with both. The independence was pretty apparent from the very beginning, but we're a pretty close-knit family. And I could see if my children went even 10 hours away or maybe 15 hours away, I could see them making the trek for the weekend to, come see mom and dad, the comfort of home. And I know it sounds dramatic, but being that far away from Washington, almost the extreme, is actually what allowed them. My daughter was super homesick at the beginning of the school year. And I think that if she were closer, she may have switched schools, or she may have wanted to be home a little bit more. And this was so healthy for her to grow in independence. So I was grateful. I miss them terribly. I love my children, but I'm so grateful that it was actually that distance. I think it made the difference.
I definitely want to echo that. Our daughter was the exact same. And that first semester especially was so hard, but it was so good. It was hard, but it was really good.
When I was in college, I only lived about 2 hours away from home. So I can definitely tell you that having a little bit of distance can make that trip home harder, but that adjustment easier as well. So thank you guys so much for sharing there. Our next question is, did you find a car was necessary the first few years at Calvin?
Honestly, no, because they developed such a rapport and quick friendship, and all the students were more than willing to help them out if they needed to go to the groceries or even church. And there have been even a couple of professors who've said, who, passed on their personal numbers and said, anytime you're stuck, you want, to go somewhere, don't hesitate to give us a call. We are more than willing to commute you to the place you want to go. So there was absolutely no necessity uh, of a vehicle of his own, even the last 4 years. He still doesn't have one. And we've asked him if he wanted one, and he said, no, not required.
We opted to send our daughter as a freshman with a car. Babysitting is a main way for her to make money, and flexibility in that was important to her. So we opted to do it. She did end up being one of the ones who then would drive everyone to Meyer or wherever they needed to go. So they do a great job. I don't think it's necessary. We chose to do it, and it was helpful for her. So
I think it is really dependent on your child. Our oldest is he welcomes any and all distractions. And so to not have a car his first couple of years actually was a good thing. Otherwise, he would have left for unnecessary reasons. Our daughter is a little bit more disciplined in that area. So we actually did send out a car her freshman year, but the two of them share it. And it has been helpful for work purposes, especially when the hours are a little bit odd. And then it's been helpful for church for sure. But Jack, my oldest, for sure, the first couple of years, everybody and their mother were offering rides, and it wasn't difficult to get around.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences there. Parents, just so you know, students are able to have a car on campus for all 4 years. I think Melissa kind of hinted at that, but you guys are welcome to go either route, whether or not your child wants to have a car on campus. So our next question of the night is going to be, can you give us an example of how your student figured something out for themselves? So kind of going back to that growth standpoint, what's like a more specific example of that?
Go ahead, Melissa. You go ahead. Okay, I'll just say, my oldest son, I describe him as being a little bit of a late bloomer, but once he figures it out, it sticks with him. And his freshman year, for sure, he was having so much fun, which is what you want them to do, to enjoy each other's company. But the late nights would catch up with him and then not do as well academically. Or he would really pour himself into his academics and then wasn't able to nurture friendships, or friendships were having experiences that he wasn't a part of. So it did feel like life balance. Like, I think we're all dealing with the same thing in our adulthood of wanting to give to our work or give to our homes, but also nurture friendships. And that's the balance I saw him. He's actually struck it in his junior year of, oh, I can have priorities. I know how to put people in their place, put things in their place, and go from there. So that to me was a really big one. And then I think Kate, it was finding her voice. Again, she's from a family that wants to please others, wants to make sure everybody's okay. I'm sure we're all like that, but she's even more so. And so she found herself saying yes to everything because she didn't want to miss out on anything, but also she didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And so again, her saying, I'm going to operate from order. And if someone asks me to do something on a Thursday, but I already have plans, or I know that's going to be time for homework, my answer has to be no, and it's not hurting anybody's feelings. It doesn't match up with my calendar. And so I think finding their voice and prioritizing has probably been, and we have not guided that process, that's been on their own.
I was just going to say a big one being out of state was medical stuff. So figuring out where she could get services. So we gave her the website and said, put in your zip code and, see who would be available, read the reviews and everything else. And she was a little overwhelmed at the beginning and had to walk her through it a little bit. But I was laughing the other day. She said, I ran out of contacts, but no worries. I got on there, found a doctor, and I'm getting them tomorrow. Like, great. So definitely learning how to, run the systems to get the things that she needs when they're not going to be the same ones that we're utilizing because we're in a different state. So.
For us, what we realized is Rehan utilized the resources that he was given. For example, tutoring, and he figured out that he could get tutoring for any subject from his mentors and students who are his seniors. So he figured that out himself and utilized that as a resource, which really benefited him a lot.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. Our next question, especially during this time of year, can kind of be a big one, but has your child ever been unable to get home due to weather? And how is access to and from the airport in Kelvin?
I was just going to say access has been super easy. Uber is also great to and from the airport. It is super cheap, like $7 to $12. So super easy to do that. She has not had a problem. We had one situation where one flight was delayed when she was going through Denver. And I believe that was her sophomore year. But we were able to navigate it and she just had to sit there a little while longer. So not that we haven't had any issues. We did have that one issue, but otherwise it's been quite easy. And we use Southwest. So one of the things I love about Calvin is they do a great job of giving us the schedule ahead of time so that we can look at the dates and say, oh, okay, this is when you have enough of a chunk of time to come home. This is worth it. So we didn't have to pay exorbitant amounts for her to come home either. We were able to set those up far enough ahead of time that it was very reasonable to get her home and have her home when she was able to come home. So
the first semester was Uber up and down, but subsequently it was always some friends picking him up or dropping him in the airport. Even if he had a flight at 6:30 in the morning, there was somebody. He had offers like from 3 or 4 people. So they build a fantastic network. They build a great rapport. And when they go back and they kind of communicate with each other and say, hey, my flight lands at this time. What time does your flight land? And they all wait for each other at the airport and they, commute back to Calvin as a group. So there's absolutely a very, very easy process because the airport is very close.
I don't have anything to add because I'm in agreement.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Yeah, the airport's only about 15 minutes away, so it's super accessible to students, regardless of whether or not they have a car on campus. Our next question is, being so far away from your student, how did you respond to if your student expressed feelings of loneliness or if they were sick? How did you react personally to those kind of instances?
It's so easy when they're home to be able to make chicken noodle soup or buy the Kleenex that they like or whatever it might be. And I think oftentimes that's good for their development when they're younger, but to interrupt some of that too much and be too readily available, I think can stifle some of their development. The easy ones are when they call you and they're sick. That's an easy thing, right? Just to Melissa's point, you can tell them, here's the zip code, go find someone. I think the more tender and more difficult to navigate is when there's an emotional need there that they're learning to navigate. So I've appreciated the services that Calvin have to offer. I do appreciate the resident assistant staff as well and the ways that they're able to support students. And I have appreciated the development in me and letting go and knowing that they're going to navigate this and this too shall pass, and having trust that that will happen. And this beauty of on the other side of it, they didn't need me. And isn't that ultimately what we want? And my answer may not have been the answer that they needed. But yeah, I think the physical need is really easy. The emotional need is it can be a little bit tougher.
To what Jen said, so when Aaliyah was having a tough time her first semester because of the time difference, and that the other thing, being aware, I would wake up in the morning and there would be like 50 texts already. So for me, it was a great opportunity to prepare myself for that. Okay, likely tomorrow morning, she's still gonna be having a tough time. How can I encourage her in this and be a part of it? So So that was good growth for me, also good growth for her, but something to be aware of. One of the things that was a great learning opportunity for me as well is seasonal affect disorder is so real, and they don't get nearly as much sun. I mean, depending on where you live on the West Coast, for San Diego, it was totally different for her. Way more cloudy days, and she loved the snow, absolutely loved the cold, but sometimes the cloudiness was hard. And Calvin did a phenomenal job. They have the lights that are available that your student can go borrow and just hang on to it for as long as they need it. And it made a huge difference for her. So Calvin does a wonderful job of having tangible resources that are there as well, in addition to the counseling center and everything else. So super, super helpful.
One thing that I'll add too is just to note is that Calvin actually does have a primary care physician on campus. So especially for families coming from out of state, that's definitely a good resource for your students to be able to access, max of a 10-minute walk away from their dorm room. And then counseling services is also heavily encouraged for any students who might need it. But Melissa's comment was actually a perfect segue into our next question. So how was living in the Midwest different for your student than life at home? So what kind of winter gear did they need to buy? Did they enjoy the snow? How was the humidity different in like the spring and the fall, that kind of thing?
My son's response was very simple. He said, as long as I don't have to shovel the snow, I love it. And, you know, as far as buying winter clothing and everything, we were very anxious initially, you know, having been living here in wonderful sunshine. And so the recommendation, and we checked with a lot of people, including the admissions counselor who was helping us. So everything we bought in Michigan, we bought it in Grand Rapids. We didn't send anything from here because sometimes, you know how kids are, right? You send them something and they don't like it. So we took him to one of the outlet malls and we let him choose, and he picked up basically what was, you know, needed than what we perceived as something that he would require. So everything was got there, and he enjoyed his winters, and there's never been a complaint. So we're hoping that we will get him back closer to home once he graduates. But he keeps saying, I wish Calvin had a postgraduate program for what he wants to do. So he loves the cold, he loves the winter.
Our family and kids tend to like the cold and the gray and the rainy of Washington State. So that worked well with Michigan. What they really missed were the mountains. And they do, when they come home, they can't wait to go visit Mount Rainier or just climb Mount Si or whatever it might be. They miss that part, but not enough to come home too often. So.
Another thing to add from an admission standpoint is that something to keep in mind too in terms of snow on campus especially is that we do have heated sidewalks. So in the winter, there's no snow on the sidewalk. So students can pretty easily walk around campus, and there are underground tunnels as well. So they can use those to get from class to class if they don't want to make, you know, the trek outside. So tons of different ways to really navigate those Michigan winters for the first time as well. So kind of moving on into our next question. So what kinds of things can parents do this upcoming summer in order to equip and empower their students when they're moving away from home?
I would say the best thing that we did before Leah went was when they do the visitations. I think for her freshman year, there were 3 different dates that they could go and visit. And that was huge, just to meet other people in her major. And then knowing she was going to see them on campus when she got there, even though they weren't, you know, close friends, at least they had connected. So that was a huge, huge thing for her the summer before freshman year. Hands down, would do it every single time. So.
I agree. A visit is so helpful. I think the other thing I asked Kate, my daughter who's a freshman at Calvin, what would you want to give as advice to parents? Like, what's the best thing that you could do? And I was saying the year before you go. So I know for some of you, it'll be just a few months, but she said, Mom, I'm glad that you and Dad let there be more independence, whether that was a little bit of an increased curfew or asking her to run errands that were multiple errands where she had to navigate some things on her own. Or just adding a little bit more life balance, because she had gone from such structure of high school. There's so much structure. Everything's dictated to you of when you go to class, how you sit there. And she said that was the shock, is that there's not as many classes. The homework is a little bit more, but you all of a sudden have all this free time. So figuring out how to prioritize that. So I think that's more a social emotional of what you can do for your kiddo. But she said, I just felt so independent and ready by the time I got to Calvin, that I could navigate some of those things. So something to consider.
There were two things that we requested Calvin before making the decision, and we made the visit. One was to allow our son to stay in the dorm for 2 nights. And so that was the first thing that was the first litmus test. So he came back after 2 days and he said, Dad, I loved it. And the second thing we wanted to do was sit in a lecture along with the students and kind of understand what the student to professor or professor to student ratio was. And I told the professor, I said, it's been many years since I've sat in a class. So if it's okay with you, I will leave in about 10 minutes. So I was with my wife and my son as well. Trust me, I sat for 45 to 50 minutes of his lecture, and it was just fantastic. And those two kind of made a lot of difference, not only for us as parents, but my son was convinced that was the place.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing. And kind of on that note of visiting, Admitted Student Day is kind of a big day where students can get to know each other coming from either in-state or out of state. But it's just a gathering of admitted students who are maybe or still deciding whether or not they want to attend Calvin for next year. So that's a really good opportunity for students to kind of get to know each other. So those dates are going to be taking place on March 25th and April 1st this year. So if you're interested, you're welcome to contact an admissions counselor about that, and we can help you get that stuff. But that being said, rolling into our next question. So what happened when your son or daughter could not come home for Thanksgiving or a birthday? So if you were planning on them coming home for an event and they couldn't come home, did you ever have that kind of experience, and how did you move forward with it?
So every year for Thanksgiving, except for 1 year where he came back home, he was welcomed by various friends and their families. So he used to go and spend from Wednesday through Sunday in someone's house. They had a great Thanksgiving. And we got to know the parents because of that process as well. And there were a couple of professors also who called us and said, if it's okay, we would like to host your son for Thanksgiving. So it was absolutely incredible. And that kind of lets them bond more with the professors and bond with the students. And so there was never an issue. And so only once in his last 4 years was he home for Thanksgiving. Otherwise, always at Calvin.
Okay. My son was more than happy to stay for Thanksgiving for all 3 years of his time at Calvin. And my daughter, like the one that I told you was so homesick, came home for Thanksgiving. But honestly, she said it was wonderful and she loved it, but it was a lot of work to travel and then kind of be ready to hit the ground running. It almost wasn't worth it because she was so tired from the traveling, though we loved having her home. And I agree, there are so many families. Jack's pastor has had him 3 years in a row in his home. A lot of availability for hosting.
So Aaliyah came home her first year, and then second year ended up not coming home, and which was hard on all of us. She's our oldest, so it was like a whole new world. But she ended up going home with her roommate, who is now her maid of honor in the wedding, just to kind of tell you how close they've gotten. And her mom texts me, and we're all getting together, when graduation happens. And the relationships that are built are just incredible to me, and the depth that is there. And Jen, as you were saying as well, Leah then decided junior, senior year, it was just too tight, close with exams and everything. It wasn't worth coming home for Thanksgiving and then going back again. It was pretty exhausting. So it was interesting to have that experience and have her choose to stay then junior, senior year.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. So rolling into our next question, when and how do you communicate with your student given the time change? So how does that typically work in a given day?
Well, we kind of built a structure based on our son's schedule. So it was always scheduled was every Saturday at a given specific time, because he knew what the schedule for him for the week was and what it was for the weekend. But apart from that, any time that he wanted to talk or we wanted to talk, WhatsApp is so easy, or a text message. So we just text him and find out if he's free, get onto a FaceTime or Zoom call, and it was never an issue as we thought it would be.
I have found when Jack was going out to Calvin, so spring of his senior year of high school, we sat him down and said, what's reasonable? And he said, probably about once a month, maybe I'll call you. And we said, well, maybe we can negotiate that, because once a month doesn't seem like that often. Well, sure enough, when he got there, he called about once a week, and it ended up being on Sundays, because that was when the whole family was there and we have Sunday meals and everybody could say hi to him. Though we tried to be honoring of it, that can be pretty overwhelming too. Oh, now your sister wants to say hi. Now your brother wants to say hi. So being honoring of that. I found that when he went through a breakup, we heard from him almost every day. And then when he is now in a relationship, it's very, very rare that we hear from him, which, that's life. And Kate, she was FaceTiming all the time. She would call randomly all throughout the day. And we had to say, hey, for our sake and for your sake. At first it was, I want to answer all the time because I want to make sure she's okay and I want to support her and love and care for her. But it got to be where it was like, oh, honey, I don't know that this is healthy for either one of us. So we had to kind of put some parameters on that, which I think it's been a benefit. It's been okay.
The only kind of structure that we landed on is we only reach out if it's urgent, like if we need to connect with her immediately on something. Otherwise, we wait for her to reach out. So, yeah.
The next question is kind of a fun one. So if you're going to send a care package to your student, what kinds of things are your favorite things to put in that?
Okay, so my husband used to give me the hardest time freshman year, telling me, you realize the care packages really are more about making you feel better than for her, right? But the things that she appreciated were things that reminded her of home. So things that she couldn't necessarily get out there in Michigan were things that we would work to put in a package for her. And then we also would send then a couple extra things so that she could share with her roommates too. So that was kind of a nice, and she enjoyed doing that. So.
I agree. Favorites from home are a big hit. And then every once in a while, just something random just to make them question and make sure, and like, mom and dad, are you guys okay? Are you losing it? Just keep them on their toes a little bit, I think is important. And then I love what you said too about the roommate, that I feel like with my children, they feel loved that we are caring for their roommates too. Just a little shout out to them. And then our church also has put together care packages, and that's been a sweet thing to broaden the connection. I've also connected with my siblings and my husband's siblings so that we do a little bit of a rotation. So it's not like, oh, at Valentine's Day, they get a ton of things, or that, you kind of spread the wealth a little bit on that.
We have never sent anything as a care package from home to him. But we have surprised him many a times by ordering food from Grand Rapids to his dorm so that he and his friends can partake in a nice meal. And that builds the rapport, that builds the bond. And I think my personal recommendation, that has worked well. And the last time I was there, his friend said, "Sir, you've sent us food so many times. We're going to take you out for dinner." So they build a amazing relationship, which will last a lifetime with this, something that I thought of, and it worked.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. So our next question is, how have you seen your students' spirituality grow on campus, especially being off on their own? How has that kind of been? Have they been excited to attend church? Have they been kind of going out of their way to get involved? How has that looked for your students?
Jack found a church right away and just hit it off with the pastor right away. And he's the gentleman that where he has a family as well. And Jack will go there for Thanksgiving. So Kate kind of had an in right away, but she would tell you, Mom, have students should get involved right away. A church, a small group, some sort of connection. Jack has expanded his group a little bit where he has a book group as well, talking about theology outside of the classroom. But I would say his faith journey has been a little bit more solidified, and Kate is left home more solid in her faith, and is now, she's still solid, but is kind of expanding her thought process, maybe being a little bit more of a critical thinker and asking questions instead of just accepting, which I actually attribute to Bear Creek, sorry, their high school, but I attribute to Calvin and the pushing to think critically and not just say the answer that they want to hear. It's welcome for them to be kind of challenged in their thinking.
I would say for Aaliyah, it's been more of a personal growth. She went to Christian school for high school. And so she is not one who has found a church off campus, but she has definitely grown in her faith and the conversations that we have, and her seeing how God is working in her life, and just things that are, I don't know, more personal, I guess is what I see in her, is really it becoming her faith and not just our family faith or going to church, but really growing personally with the Lord.
If my memory serves me right, when Rehan joined Calvin, every Sunday, I think they were allowed to sign up, and a little van used to take them to churches. So there were various options. So he could decide whether he wants to go to church A, B, C. So initially, the first semester, it was like a church hop, trying to figure out what would best, be of interest to him. And then subsequently, once they zero in on a church, they find friends from Calvin who are part of the church. And so every Sunday they are there. And then I think they get together, I think once a week for Bible study. And that gives us a lot of strength as well, knowing that he's, apart from being professionally molded, he's spiritually being molded in Calvin as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing those stories. So our next question is, how did you get your students' stuff to Calvin? And what did you wait to buy until you arrived in Michigan?
Go ahead, Melissa. Sorry.
I was just going to say, we waited to buy a lot of the basics there. So a lot of, especially with Bed Bath & Beyond and Target, you can order things ahead of time, which is a good idea because the extra long sheets do end up running out. So ordering those things ahead of time and having them ready there was super helpful. She did drive a car out, so we caravanned out. So she brought her personal things with her, but everything else, we like printer, bedding, jackets, all of that we bought out there, and it worked really, really well. We didn't have any issues finding what she needed and getting her set up with those things.
We bought everything in Grand Rapids, except for his personal clothing. Everything was picked up in Grand Rapids, and it was very easy. it was very easy to navigate. There was, students who were willing to help take us to shops based on what we needed, and it's super, super, super easy.
Agreed.
Sorry. Real quick, one of the things that really impressed us moving in was just the help from other students once they got to the dorm. I mean, the students were all over the place with big bins, helping you move stuff in, helping you stack things if you needed help. So it was super, super easy and welcoming.
Thanks so much for sharing. In addition, we do have a checklist online with some different items that you might want to consider bringing, including some things that you can't have in the dorms. One that comes to mind is just microwaves, because we have microwaves in some common areas in the dorms, but there's a complete checklist online of things that we recommend bringing, and then some things that we don't recommend bringing anyway. So that can be a really good thing to use as a resource as you're looking at what you want to bring. So our next question is, what were your students' experiences with working during the academic year, on campus versus off campus, and how did they find open positions?
My children, before they went to Calvin, worked at UPS, United Parcel Services, and they received from UPS a $5,000 scholarship to go towards school. So they were able to transfer from Washington State to the hub in Michigan. And that was really helpful. It is early mornings, and that is a challenge. At Jack's freshman year, he also got a job on campus very easily. There were a lot available, and his job was cleaning one of the science buildings. I mean, he enjoyed it. Actually, it was kind of fun to be a little more invested in his community, and it was super manageable hour-wise. And then Kate just got a job in the mess hall, and I think she's doing it. She's already signed up for a job next year working with students and I don't know all the details, but I do know that it was easily found and easily filled for her, and that was helpful. Sometimes, like you were saying, it's spending money, and sometimes it's I got to make the tuition payment. So I thought that was helpful.
All of our on-campus jobs are also posted on Handshake. So that's something when students start in late August, early September, that's something that they'll have direct access to. And they can also talk to the Career and Internship Center for any on-campus or off-campus opportunities as well. So lots of contacts there.
Now, Leah did a lot of babysitting and was able to, some of it was word of mouth, but some of it was also the Career Center of being able to go there and finding what was posted there for that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Getting a job on campus was pretty simple. So I think each semester, except for his senior year, he did various things. He was one semester, I think he was in the admissions office calling prospective students. Then for a couple of semesters, one semester he was in the Prince Conference Center working in the banquets. And then I think for 2 years, he was with the Western Michigan Research Lab, which is on campus. And the final year, which is his senior year right now, he could not take up a job because he's got a full-time responsibility as an RA, which is equivalent to having a job because it kind of compensates adequately on certain, outflow of your dollars as well.
Jack is an RA too. I wonder if our sons know each other.
Sorry?
Jack is also an RA.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
I'll check with him. Okay.
It's a pretty tight-knit campus community, so hopefully they know each other as fellow RAs there. But yeah, tons of different job opportunities both on and off campus. In a typical year, we have about 1,200 jobs on campus, so a lot of different options for students to choose from. So kind of rolling into our next question of the night. Right now, we only have about 3 questions left. So if you guys have any additional questions, again, feel free to use that Q&A feature. But as of now, we're going to go through those questions, and then we'll add on if we have any additional questions that come in. So next question is there a place for students to store their things in between semesters on campus?
Yes. I don't know where they do it, but every time Rehan used to come home for summer, I used to ask him, what about your stuff? He said, we have place, we have provision to store all this. So there's never been an issue.
I can actually give a little bit more insight into what those rooms are as well. So we have something called trunk rooms in every dorm. And that's essentially a space where students are welcome to keep their stuff over the summers. Over winter, obviously, you're going to be moving back into the same dorm room usually for second semester, but over summer, especially if you want to keep any of that Michigan winter gear that you won't necessarily, need in San Diego or California, you're welcome to do that as well.
The cool thing about the trunk rooms too is you can utilize them, because sometimes with the dorm rooms, everybody's a little different, but sometimes those closets can get a little tight. So you can also cycle the clothing. So if you want to put like the winter clothing in there for fall and spring, it makes it, they're easily accessible. You just talk to your RA and there's certain times where they unlock it. So used also outside of the summer, which is awesome.
And then actually our final question of the night, because one of the other ones was answered a little bit earlier, but which staff or faculty or student leaders have become mentors or go-to advisors for your students?
Let me start. One of the professors there who everyone recommended that being the major that my son was doing to stay connected was Professor Senaya. So I did meet with him, spoke to him, and he has been just an amazing human being. He invited us to his house, met with the family, and he gave an open invitation for Rehan. Anytime he needs a home to stay, his house is open, and his advice and the resources that he was able to provide Rehan with is absolutely immense. And that is one of the many. So apart from that, there have been so many other professors, so many other seniors who've been mentors. So any prospective student going into Calvin will never have to worry about being handheld by somebody, because everyone is there, reaching out across the aisle to help the student grow personally and professionally.
So Aaliyah had met Professor Zandy when she first went to visit Calvin, and totally that's when she fell in love with Calvin and decided this is where she wanted to go to school. And Zandy ended up being her advisor and has been wonderful through all of it. And also the great thing is in these different departments in the schools, what we have found and what I keep hearing is the students help each other out. So as the sophomores are applying to the nursing program, they're connecting with the juniors and seniors who are trying to help them and answer their questions. And then the juniors are connecting with the seniors for what does senior year look like? What should I be requesting? So it's not only the professors who are great, but it's also just the student body that they're wanting to help each other out and try to make it, a good experience. So.
I agree. Y'all are so good at the actual names of the professors. I just know that my children have had a really good experience with the professors. And when you talked about the advisor for Kate in particular, she started out a certain way. And because of her time with the advisor, I think got some better direction because of that advising. And then I agree with you, the students help each other out so much. And the older ones are, at least in Kate's experience, have been really quite helpful and supportive. And then I think also on the flip side of that, Jack has appreciated being that older student and helping out others as well. So it all comes kind of full circle, I think, a little bit.
Definitely a very unique and very special community. And thank you guys so much for your participation tonight and for helping answer some of those questions. For any prospective parents out there, if you guys think of additional questions down the road, I'm sure you will. You're welcome to send those to admissions@calvin.edu or contact your admissions counselor directly, and we'll be happy to chat with you and answer any of those questions that you might have. But that kind of wraps up our event for the evening. So I just want to say thank you all for joining us. Thank you, parents, for answering those questions. And I hope everybody has a really great night. So yeah, thank you so much.